Thank you. God bless you. God bless the nations of the world. And God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Make no mistake, this historic, brave speech by President Trump is a declaration of war against the robber baron class that created the UN, not as an instrument of global peace, but an instrument of global corporate colonialism 2.0. Okay, let's go to this powerful compilation of the 35-minute historic, brave, honorable, truthful speech by the president where he calls out the very foundation of what the UN is meant to promote, a worldwide robber baron, ultra-rich controlled system with 99.9% under it living under a quasi-communist hell. Here it is.
What a difference a constitutional American president makes at the United Nations.
His Excellency Donald Trump, President of the United States of America, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Authority and authoritarian powers seek to collapse the values, the systems, and alliances that prevented conflict and tilted the world toward freedom since World War II. International criminal networks traffic drugs, weapons, people, forced dislocation and mass migration, threaten our borders, and new forms of aggression exploit technology to menace our citizens. To put it simply, we meet at a time of both immense promise and great peril. It is entirely up to us whether we lift the world to new heights or let it fall into a valley of disrepair. We must begin with the wisdom of the past.
You know, Trump
Our
wrote this.
success depends on a coalition of strong and independent nations that embrace their sovereignty to promote security, prosperity, and peace for themselves and for the world. We do not expect diverse countries to share the same cultures, traditions, or even systems of government, but we do expect all nations to uphold these two core sovereign duties: to respect the interests of their own people and the rights of every other sovereign nation.
Nationalism.
The greatest in the United States Constitution is its first three beautiful words. They are, "We the people." Generations of Americans have sacrificed to maintain the promise of those words, the promise of our country and of our great history. In America, the people govern, the people rule, and the people are sovereign. I was elected not to take power, but to give power to the American people where it belongs. In foreign affairs, we are renewing this founding principle of sovereignty. Our government's first duty is to its people, to our citizens, to serve their needs, to ensure their safety, to preserve their rights.
This is the American Revolution.
To defend their values.
And it's back.
As President of the United States, I will always put America first. Just like you, as the leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first.
Because when you don't, you put the globalists first. They control the UN.
And just as the founders of this body intended, we must work together and confront together those who threaten us with chaos, turmoil, and terror. The scourge of our planet today is a small group of rogue regimes that violate every principle on which the United Nations is based. They respect neither their own citizens nor the sovereign rights of their countries. If the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph. When decent people and nations become bystanders to history, the forces of destruction only gather power and strength.
That's Thomas Jefferson stuff.
No one has shown more contempt for other nations and for the well-being of their own people than the depraved regime in North Korea. It is responsible for the starvation deaths of millions of North Koreans and for the imprisonment, torture, killing, and oppression of countless more. We were all witness to the regime's deadly abuse when an innocent American college student, Otto Warmbier, was returned to America only to die a few days later. We saw it in the assassination of the dictator's brother using banned nerve agents in an international airport. We know it kidnapped a sweet 13-year-old Japanese girl from a beach in her own country to enslave her as a language tutor for North Korea's spies. If this is not twisted enough, now North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles threatens the entire world with unthinkable loss of human life. It is an outrage that some nations would not only trade with such a regime, but would arm, supply, and financially support a country that imperils the world with nuclear conflict. No nation on earth has an interest in seeing this band of criminals arm itself with nuclear weapons and missiles. The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary. That's what the United Nations is all about. It is far past time for the nations of the world to confront another reckless regime, one that speaks openly of mass murder, vowing death to America, destruction to Israel, and ruin for many leaders and nations in this room. The Iranian government masks a corrupt dictatorship behind the false guise of a democracy. We cannot let a murderous regime continue these destabilizing activities while building dangerous missiles, and we cannot abide by an agreement if it provides cover for the eventual construction of a nuclear program. The entire world understands that the good people of Iran want change. And other than the vast military power of the United States, that Iran's people are what their leaders fear the most. This is what causes the regime to restrict internet access, tear down satellite dishes, shoot unarmed student protesters, and imprison political reformers. Oppressive regimes cannot endure forever, and the day will come when the people will face a choice. Will they continue down the path of poverty, bloodshed, and terror? Or will the Iranian people return to the nation's proud roots as a center of civilization, culture, and wealth, where their people can be happy and prosperous once again? The United States is a compassionate nation and has spent billions and billions of dollars in helping to support this effort. We seek an approach to refugee resettlement that is designed to help these horribly treated people and which enables their eventual return to their home countries to be part of the rebuilding process. For the cost of resettling one refugee in the United States, we can assist more than 10 in their home region. Out of the goodness of our hearts, we offer financial assistance to hosting countries in the region, and we support recent agreements of the G20 nations that will seek to host refugees as close to their home countries as possible. This is the safe, responsible, and humanitarian approach. We also thank the Secretary General for recognizing that the United Nations must reform if it is to be an effective partner in confronting threats to sovereignty, security, and prosperity. Too often, the focus of this organization has not been on results, but on bureaucracy and process. In some cases, states that seek to subvert this institution's noble aims have hijacked the very systems that are supposed to advance them. For example, it is a massive source of embarrassment to the United Nations that some governments with egregious human rights records sit on the UN Human Rights Council. The United States is one out of 193 countries in the United Nations, and yet we pay 22% of the entire budget and more. In fact, we pay far more than anybody realizes. The United States bears an unfair cost burden, but to be fair, if it could actually accomplish all of its stated goals, especially the goal of peace, this investment would easily be well worth it. The socialist dictatorship of Nicolas Maduro has inflicted terrible pain and suffering on the good people of that country. This corrupt regime destroyed a prosperous nation by imposing a failed ideology that has produced poverty and misery everywhere it has been tried. To make matters worse, Maduro has defied his own people, stealing power from their elected representatives to preserve his disastrous rule. The Venezuelan people are starving, and their country is collapsing. Their democratic institutions are being destroyed. This situation is completely unacceptable, and we cannot stand by and watch. As a responsible neighbor and friend, we and all others have a goal. That goal is to help them regain their freedom, recover their country, and restore their democracy. I would like to thank leaders in this room for condemning the regime and providing vital support to the Venezuelan people. The United States has taken important steps to hold the regime accountable. We are prepared to take further action if the government of Venezuela persists on its path to impose authoritarian rule on the Venezuelan people. We are fortunate to have incredibly strong and healthy trade relationships with many of the Latin American countries gathered here today. Our economic bond forms a critical foundation for advancing peace and prosperity for all of our people and all of our neighbors. I ask every country represented here today to be prepared to do more to address this very real crisis. We call for the full restoration of democracy and political freedoms in Venezuela. The problem in Venezuela is not that socialism has been poorly implemented, but that socialism has been faithfully implemented. The true question for the United Nations today, for people all over the world who hope for better lives for themselves and their children, is a basic one. Are we still patriots? Do we love our nations enough to protect their sovereignty and to take ownership of their futures? Do we revere them enough to defend their interests, preserve their cultures, and ensure a peaceful world for their citizens. One of the greatest American patriots, John Adams, wrote that the American Revolution was effected before the war commenced. The revolution was in the minds and hearts of the people. That was the moment when America awoke, when we looked around and understood that we were a nation. We realized who we were, what we valued, and what we would give our lives to defend. From its very first moments, the American story is the story of what is possible when people take ownership of their future. The United States of America has been among the greatest forces for good in the history of the world, and the greatest defenders of sovereignty, security, and prosperity for all. Now we are calling for a great reawakening of nations, for the revival of their spirits, their pride, their people, and their patriotism. History is asking us whether we are up to the task. Our answer will be a renewal of will, a rediscovery of resolve, and a rebirth of devotion we need to defeat the enemies of humanity and unlock the potential of life itself. So let this be our mission, and let this be our message to the world. We will fight together, sacrifice together, and stand together for peace, for freedom, for justice, for family, for humanity, and for the Almighty God who made us all. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the nations of the world, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to come back with 3 or 4 minutes of key analysis by John Bound, looking at how Obama responded after the speech and more. Make no mistake, this historic, brave speech by President Trump is a declaration of war against the robber baron class that created the UN, not as an instrument of global peace, but an instrument of global corporate colonialism 2.0. That's why this speech is so important, and that's why this compilation that you just saw, this boil down, is so key that everyone actually see for themselves so they understand why the corporate-owned media, owned by the globalist, hates Trump so much, because he's not out to get anybody. He's only out to stop the globalist from literally setting up a planetary dictatorship. We're going to come back and get to the final breakdown. It's the most important part of it all by John Bound. Just briefly, I've decided to extend the 50% off that we've never done until these hurricanes hit because of the Mexico earthquake and all the rest of it. People are really responding right now because they understand that there's a lot of earth changes, a lot of North Korea crisis, a lot of attempts to start race war, a time of crisis, a time of quickening, and it's just best to be prepared. 50% off at InfoWarsStore.com on all the high-quality storeable food with promo code READY. A lot of other specials in today. Thank you all for your support. But these are great deals, so we're supporting you as well. What is President Trump doing when he goes to the UN wearing his America lapel pin, his U.S. flag? What is he doing when he goes to the G20 and everybody else, including Putin, is wearing the G20 pin and Trump's not wearing it? He's symbolically saying, look, I represent the people of America, and I'm going to go for their best interest. And by the way, they've done major studies on this. When you build up a country, it builds up the countries around it. Under globalism, it's a giant sucking sound, as Ross Perot told you. They were making $45 an hour in Canada 7 years ago. As soon as they opened that border up with us, it went down from 45 to about 25. Now, we're at 25 right now. Mexico, average worker's about $1, factory worker. We're going to see it come down to $15 in the U.S. You don't want to do this. That happened. Henry Ford, for as bad as he was in some ways, raised his salary so much so that people could afford to buy the trucks and have an economy, and that was his main customer base to launch Ford Motor Co. was his employees. That's how you kickstart something. So here's Hillary saying that she's the Paul Revere. I guess for the globalist, you're the Paul Revere. Trump's the Paul Revere. I'm the Paul Revere. We're all the Paul Reveres saying we don't want to be under your worldwide tyranny. Here she is.
I am saying as clearly as I can, I feel like I'm a bit of a, Paula Revere. I'm trying to sound the alarm about this. Is that the...
So we've always said we're the resistance, we're Paul Revere, we're the patriots. She's now stealing all of our iconography, all of our slogans, all of what we say we are, because we are that, we deliver. So she's getting desperate. Let's go back to Trump's epic, historic speech. Then we'll go to break and come back and get into the compilation of the late-night comics, reading off teleprompters, making fun of Trump about wiretapping. Boy, do they got egg on their face. They fell on their little noses. But back to the president.
Trump's words over a socialist, globalist former president.
The existing path to global integration requires a course correction. And as these real problems have been neglected, alternative visions of the world have pressed forward, both in the wealthiest countries and in the poorest. Religious fundamentalism, the politics of ethnicity or tribe or sect, aggressive nationalism, a crude populism, sometimes from the far left, but more often from the far right, which seeks to restore what they believe was a better, simpler age free of outside contamination. These are the policies that I've pursued here in the United States, and with clear results. A society that asks less of oligarchs than ordinary citizens will rot from within. That's why we've worked to reach trade agreements that raise labor standards and raise environmental standards, as we've done with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, so that the benefits are more broadly shared.
TPP.
The United Nations is in a state of shock after having their spiral into decadence and globalist view blown to bits. But the left, still chewing on the Russia collusion fairy tale and crippled by overwhelming cognitive dissonance, saw something entirely different. NBC foreign correspondent Bill Neely tweeted, quote, missing from @RealDonaldTrump's speech at #UNGA, criticism of Russia, hardly mentioned, end quote. Wallace Ritchie tweeted, quote, at United Nations, Donald Trump laments destabilizing regimes, fails to mention his own or Russia, end quote. And Randy L. Klein tweets, when your United Nations speech is written by @StephenMillerAL, an actual Nazi white supremacist, and read by a complete and total idiot. Klein is basing this Nazi white supremacist claim on Miller's false mentorship by Richard Spencer. But I guess everyone is a Nazi to the left, including conservative Jews. John Bound reporting for Infowars.com.
That's right. And Trump has a big hand in writing all his speeches, but Stephen Miller is a great patriot. And everybody understands the authoritarianism of the UN. They're the foreign power we're dealing with.
What the aging process is when the cell replicates, we lose a little bit of our telomeres. Telomeres are the little cups on the end of our chromosomes.
And when it runs out, you start dying. Secure your DNA force today at InfoWarsLife.com.